In this episode, we speak to Rob Stinton, Chartered Project Professional, about the complexity of major infrastructure projects, stakeholder engagement, and maintaining momentum. Rob offers us tips from his 20-plus years experience as he explains the importance of clear project objectives from day one and of regular stakeholder engagement throughout all project stages. We talk about dealing with complex environments, not losing sight of objectives, and how at the core of all project success are communications and ultimately operational readiness. What's right today may not be right in a year's time, and therefore we need to constantly check in, adapt to, and communicate any changes. Rob's key takeaway is always expect the unexpected, especially when dealing with stakeholders. Welcome to this episode of Implementing Best Practice in Business. We're here to help you and your organisation understand and implement global best practice to help you face the business challenges of today. Join me, Richard Farrow, CEO of APMG International, in talking to leaders and practitioners who have applied these frameworks and practices to boost their productivity. They're here, willing to share their knowledge and experience to help you learn from them so you can do the same to make you more competitive in today's market. My guest today is Rob Stinton. Rob has 20 years' experience in the development and implementation of major projects and programs, predominantly in the transport sector, covering a broad range of disciplines from major construction works to technology and IT programs. He's led large project teams delivering complex projects across multiple locations. Rob is passionate about project development and sponsorship, justifying the business need for an initiative in the first place, clearly defining requirements to meet the desired outcomes, and ultimately being accountable for the benefits. He has successfully demonstrated that you can sponsor a project through the early stages, hand over that role, and go on to deliver the project through later stages. Rob is a chartered project professional. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Richard. It's good to be here.
Rob, are major infrastructure projects really more complex than other projects or simply bigger? And if they are more complex, how would you define the key elements of complexity that make them so?
I think major projects, by their very nature, are quite big, certainly. I don't think necessarily the size of a project is always a measure of its complexity. I've had experience on some fairly major schemes that are fairly straightforward in terms of delivery, if you like. But, complexity can come in many forms, I guess. But how do you define a big project? A big project to one organisation may be very different to a big project in another organisation. But I think that the second part of your question's probably more interesting, is how do you define the complexity of a project? And for me, I think there's probably 3 or 4 things that are really key there. The solution that you're delivering, if that's a tried and tested product or delivery methodology, then the complexity is perhaps not quite so great. If you're delivering something that's new and novel, or a new and novel method of delivery, then that brings its own sort of challenges. So that's something that's certainly factored into the complexity of any piece of work. Also, the complexity of the environment that you're delivering into. I've worked for many years in fairly complex operational environments where you're delivering into an operation that is live. You can't stop that operation, or it's very difficult to stop that operation. That in itself can bring a level of complexity in how you deliver and what you deliver that needs to be obviously carefully managed and very well controlled. If you're delivering a fairly complex piece of work on a greenfield site, it's slightly different. I've been involved in those sort of projects, and actually your delivery methodology, if you can move your work site away from the operation or contain it some way, then you can limit the complexity of what you're impacting around you, I guess. So that's certainly a factor that needs to be considered. But perhaps the biggest one is what level of change are you introducing to the operation or to the business? Because whilst the product or the delivery methodology might be simple or complex, if you're making major changes to that organisation or how that organisation works, then the complexity and the uncertainty and the risk around that piece of work is a factor of complexity higher, I guess. So I think those sort of things for me are key in sort of understanding the complexity of what you're doing and how you then go on to deliver it.
Rob, as someone that's been involved in sort of infrastructure projects, do you get involved in that impact, that change impact on the operational team, or is that something that is left to somebody else within the client organisation? Is that a client role or is that a contract delivery role, do you think?
It's certainly something that, well, the client absolutely should be involved with that. To what level, it might, that can vary, I guess, somewhat. And again, it depends on what you're delivering. The size of the change may not become completely evident until you know what the solution is, in some ways. And sometimes, and going back to my early days in development, that defining what the solution should be, the optioneering, you always want to avoid as much change as you possibly can, I guess. That's not always possible, but how you assess the impact of that change very much should be the client's high on their priority, I guess, because again, going back to the previous question, I think that the size of that change is really important to the organisation. But the people who really understand what that change might mean are the people you're impacting most. So those sort of people really need to be involved in that assessment. The contractor, the supplier, if you like, could well be involved with that, but the time that you're, the time to do that change impact assessment is probably before you've got a supplier or a contractor on board. So I think at the very early stages, you'd need to assess that. It might be part of the business case or the justification for what you're doing sometimes, but it's also something you'd revisit at a regular, in a regular occurrence, because things change, particularly in the environment of transportation, if you like. Things change externally as well that you need to consider. So that change assessment is something that you need to review, I think, quite often.
Rob, you talk about the early stages of a complex project or complex program. How do you arrive at a manageable stakeholder plan? There must be so many interested parties in these types of projects or programs. So how do you manage that? How do you get down to, who are the key stakeholders? How do you manage them? I'm sure it's an iterative process, but are there any particular tools or techniques that you apply to make sure you've identified the key players?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing is I obviously find out who your stakeholders are. That might not always be obvious. Your key stakeholders will probably be fairly obvious, but understanding who all the people that you're going to impact or might have an interest or influence over what you're doing, that probably needs some sort of formal assessment and workshops, and previous project lessons learned from other works are really useful in determining who those might be. Grouping stakeholders in terms of how they're impacted, what sort of level of change might be introduced. Those are all really important things to do. And I think it's really important that they're done at an early stage so that you can compile as many of the stakeholders as you possibly can, because the next stage in terms of assessing those stakeholders so that you can form a plan on how you're going to manage them going forward is where you'd understand their influence, their interest, and therefore how you're going to manage them going forward. So I'd get them all down on a page, as many as possible, as early as possible, and work on the ones that really need to be engaged with first.
I mean, I can remember running a project when I worked for the London Docklands Development Corporation, and we were replacing a boundary wall, and the boundary was a broken down chain link fence with some corrugated panels against it, and we're replacing it with a nice brick wall. And I was sort of chairing a community or residents meeting to explain this wonderful piece of landscaping. And someone said they hate brickwork. They don't want the wall to be a brickwork wall at the end of their garden.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want any change. That's probably the most memorable stakeholder engagement I have. What's your most memorable stakeholder engagement, good or bad? What's the one that sticks in your mind and you think, for heaven's sake, where did that come from?
Actually, it's probably something similar. Many years ago, actually, to be fair, it was part of the planning consultation process for a transport scheme I was leading on. I went to a residents' meeting with the local planning officer to present what we were doing or what our plans were, what the impact might be, and what the benefits would be to the local residents as well. And I thought I was well prepared. I was prepared for any questions around my project and what the challenges might be. But what I wasn't prepared for was all of the questions and queries about everything else going on around the airport. And I guess the lessons learned for me on that particular occasion was expect the unexpected, because particularly when you're engaging with stakeholders who, or your neighbours, I suppose, their concerns and interests can be manifold, and much of which you perhaps can't answer for them. So it's quite an intense session until the end, when we sort of got back onto the topic of what I was actually doing, and they were absolutely fine. They thought it was wonderful. So it was quite an intense. I think it was the first time I'd actually presented to I think the public in that sort of situation as well. But yeah, lessons learned and quite a memorable experience, I have to say.
And of course, the problem is the theory never supports, does it? The whole idea of the stakeholder analysis and putting people into categories and that. The reality hits you when you're in front of a group and you realise no matter how much prior preparation that you do, there's always that oddball comment or left field comment that comes in and it does throw you. It's quite surprising on how variable stakeholders can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that engagement with stakeholders, for me, it's about understanding, what their requirements are, what their, how what you're doing could impact on them. Forming a good relationship with stakeholders, whether they're interested or not, or whether they have a huge amount of influence over what you do or not, can be quite important sometimes, because it helps in terms of understanding how you can engage with them, how you can bring them on side sometimes. If what you're delivering is completely aligned with their own sort of strategic position, well, that's great, but that's not always the case, particularly when you've got multiple stakeholders, multiple clients, if you like, or multiple customers that you're delivering to. Not all your stakeholders are going to be as aligned as others, so bringing them along on a journey is quite important. But if you can find common ground, that is always helpful, and you can only do that if you engage with them and form some form of relationship with them. You can't do that with everybody when you've got a lot. So, but yes, I find sitting down with people, understanding what makes them tick, what's important to them, can really help you shape your engagement plan.
And as major infrastructure projects, they take a very long time to deliver. Usually, certainly in the UK, we have a very long planning consultation period before work starts on the ground, and then probably just as long, if not longer, construction period when the work is being done before it comes to realization. How do you sort of maintain momentum and interest from the stakeholders through those two sort of processes, bearing in mind the length of time it takes? Because the environment changes probably during that period as well. So someone might have been positive at the beginning and it's negative at the end. So how do you overcome that challenge? Because it must be very hard to maintain momentum and interest through such a long period, both in the planning and in the execution. Yeah, what is your experience in that area?
Yeah, quite a lot currently. Actually, the program I'm working on at the moment actually has a very long history. It's 10 years in delivery already. So you're right. It's maintaining that momentum and the right level of engagement with stakeholders is really important. Yeah, how you communicate with your stakeholders is part of your stakeholder management plan. Regular communications are really important in terms of progress. Reminding stakeholders of why you're doing something in the first place is always a good idea. Sometimes it's quite easy to lose sight of what the objectives of the project might be and what the benefits will be, particularly on a major infrastructure scheme that has a long gestation period and a long delivery period. But regular communications at the right level and pitching those communications at the right level as well. So progress reports are really important, but how regular and the frequency of those sort of comms can vary depending on where you are, what you're doing, and how those stakeholders are currently being impacted. Certain key stakeholders need to be kept abreast of everything you're doing on a regular basis. Others perhaps only when you're really going to impact on them. So getting the right level of communications is important. And reports are one thing, and newsletters can be really, really useful. But as you're getting closer to delivering something and impacting on them, more frequent communications, face-to-face meetings, more difficult these days than it has been in the past. But direct communications are really important, particularly when you've got a deployment or a commissioning that needs a large amount of support and collaboration with your stakeholders in an operational environment. It's really important that the frequency of that engagement increases the closer you get to something that's going to change for them. It's variable, but it's something that you need to keep on top of and update as the project progresses as well. What's right today might be not quite right in a year's time. So it's a moving feast, if you like, but keeping on top of your stakeholder management plan is really important.
I read recently that the Thames Tideway Tunnel had shifted a lot of the delivery of equipment, materials, and taking away excavated spoil to barges. And so and I think the number was remove 50,000 lorry movements. I don't know over what period of time. Do you see this, these ideas that are now coming on with major projects about care for the environment, different ways of doing things, as part of something that sort of evolves through those earlier discussions with the stakeholders about are there alternative ways of doing it? Because I would imagine that if I was living near a construction site for a tunnel excavation, the fact that it could be taken away by barge, so it's quite quiet and seamless, as opposed to lorries trundling past my front door day and night, is probably quite an environmental benefit and quite a benefit to me as a resident. So are you seeing more interest, more discussion about different ways of construction now than maybe you did, say, 10 or 15 years ago?
Yes, in some ways, yes. I think there's certainly more interest from more people these days around those sort of factors. I think certainly from my sort of early days in projects, construction projects, particularly at Heathrow, it was something that was baked into what we did anyway because of the nature of the airport and taking care of our neighbours and the understanding the impact of sort of major construction that was ongoing at the time, certainly when I joined, was very much part of development plans that we worked on. So things like, as you said, how you remove spoil or construction debris from the site is really important. How you can reuse some of those materials without taking them away. That was something that we did a lot of at Heathrow. A lot of the old concrete that we dug up when we were realigning the airfield, we reused as hardcore for new taxiways and new runways. So we reduced the amount of spoil by, I think, something like over 50%. Off-site manufacturing was something that we did a lot of at Heathrow, because again, a fairly small constrained site. The more manufacturing you can do off-site pre-construction is really valuable, and makes the construction site safer as well. So there's benefits to looking at construction methodology far wider ranging than just perhaps the environmental side of it. So all of these considerations are really important at an early stage as well. So I think there's certainly more interest in it these days, but certainly from my point of view, it's always been something in my time anyway that has been fairly high up on the agenda.
So with your career in infrastructure projects, what do you know now that you really wish you had known when you started your first major project? What would be the 1, 2, or 3 key learning points that you look at and think, if only I had known that when I was working on?
Wow, everything. I mean, experience counts for so much, and same for me, for my team, everyone, I guess. Tools and techniques and project management. We talk a lot about project life cycles, project tools, techniques. They're fantastic things, and they're really good to know. Experience in using them, and how you use them, and the appropriate levels of using them are, in my view, more important, because just applying project management tools and techniques because they're there is not the right thing to do. It's making them appropriate to what you're doing. I guess the one thing for me that stands out more than anything else about, in terms of what I'd like to have known then, or perhaps understood better when I first started, was understanding the significance of the change that you're going to be implementing, because projects tend to be all about building something or implementing something. And we all want to do that. We all want to make something, build something, and look at it and stand back and think how wonderful it is. But actually understanding what it's going to do to the people and the environment that you're implementing it in, understanding that at an early stage is so important, because it can drive so many things. What you do, how you do it, what the risks are, how you engage your stakeholders, having a really good understanding, as much as you can, about that change, for me is perhaps the biggest lesson for me over the years, I guess. And that develops as you move through a project, but really understanding that, and understanding how important it is for me the biggest lesson.
Rob, congratulations on becoming a chartered project professional. But
thank you.
What was your motivation for going through it? Why did you put yourself through that that worrying concern of assessment by my peers? Why take it on?
That's a really good question. I think it was just that. I think for me it was about, I think I spent 20 years in this line of work. I don't have many other qualifications for a start, and I think actually being recognised by your peers is something to be proud of, and for me it was a bit of a challenge as well. I guess I'd been in development and sponsorship for most of my career, I guess, in the project environment, and whilst chartership doesn't sort of you can be a project manager, a commercial manager, a planner. Anybody can apply for chartership, but I didn't know of any sponsors that had. So part of it was for me was around recognition. I spend a lot of time with other sponsors in our business, and I'm really interested in their development, and I think it was something that is great for them to aspire to as well. So showing them that it can be done, I think was a great idea. But yeah, it was personally, it was just a great achievement, I think.
Thank you. I mean, leading by example is always good, isn't it? So congratulations on taking that, and hopefully many of your colleagues will follow you.
Yes, a lot of them have actually, which is great.
Excellent. Rob, many thanks for finding the time for the podcast. I know you're incredibly busy on your current project, so thanks for taking the time out to do that.
You're welcome.
Great talking to you and hearing your experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Good to talk to you as well.
Thank you for listening. We're always keen to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. You can find all the information in the show notes below. Please visit apmg-international.com to find out more about our accredited training and the certifications that support them that are related to the topics discussed in this series. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I look forward to you joining future episodes while we continue our exploration into best practice and the benefits it brings to global business. Thank you.